The November morning began like so many others in my small Ohio home. The house was quiet, the radiator clicking faintly against the cold that always seeped in through the drafty windows. I moved about my kitchen, slowly setting the kettle to boil, measuring the familiar spoonfuls of coffee into the filter. At 70 years old, I cherished the ritual, the simple comfort of consistency. I had just pulled 2 mugs from the cupboard when the front door swung open, so violently it banged against the wall. My son Tyler rushed in, his breath ragged as if he had been running. His hair was mussed, his jacket half-zipped, and in his hand he clutched a slip of paper, waving it in the air like a battle flag. "Mom, Mom, you won't believe this," he shouted, his voice breaking with exhilaration. I nearly dropped the mugs, startled. "Good heavens, Tyler, what on earth? I did it!" he cried, his face flushed with triumph. He slammed the paper down onto the kitchen table, and I saw the bold black numbers printed across it. The lottery, I won the jackpot. $250 million. For a moment, I could only stare. The kettle began to whistle behind me, a sharp counterpoint to the thundering of my heart. I turned it off mechanically, the steam rising like a veil around me. You won?" I asked softly. "Yes." He snatched up the ticket again, pressing it to his chest. "Do you hear me? I'm rich, Mom. We're rich." A smile spread across my face, tentative at first, but then genuine. "Oh, Tyler, after all these years of you working those long shifts at the plant, what a blessing." But even as I reached for him, he stepped back. His expression shifted. The joy in his eyes hardened into something else, something that made my stomach tighten. "I don't think you understand," he said. "This isn't about us. It's about me. I don't have to stay in this dump anymore." The words stung. I glanced around our kitchen, the worn linoleum floor, the faded curtains, the mismatched chairs collected over decades. To me, they were the proof of a life built through sacrifice. To him, apparently, they were nothing but a cage. "Tyler, this is your home," I said, my voice trembling. He laughed harshly. "This was my home because I had no choice. But now I can buy the house I've always wanted. Do you remember the old Whitmore estate out by the river? The one Dad used to talk about before he left?" I froze. My late husband had walked out on us decades ago, but I remembered the Whitmore estate all too well, its grand stone facade, the manicured lawns. To hear Tyler speak of it now with that greedy gleam in his eyes was like reopening a wound that had never fully healed. "That house is cursed with memories," I whispered. He shrugged. "Not to me. I'll make it mine. I'll finally show people what I deserve." I tried to steady my hands as I poured the coffee, though the liquid sloshed against the rim of the mug. "Tyler, you've always had a home here. I gave you everything I could. Nights working 2 jobs, scrubbing tables, cleaning houses. Enough," he snapped, cutting me off. "I don't need the sob story again. You did what you had to. But I don't need your sacrifices anymore." I stared at him, unable to comprehend how the boy I had nursed through fevers, the young man I had cheered for at every graduation, could look at me with such contempt. He leaned closer, lowering his voice, each word like a blade. "We don't need your leftover food anymore." My chest tightened, the insult burning worse than any wound. Leftovers. That was what he called the decades I had given him. The mugs sat untouched on the table between us, steam curling upward, as if marking the silence that stretched across the kitchen. Tyler pocketed the ticket and turned away, already pulling out his phone to make a call. I stood rooted to the spot, my hands trembling against the counter, as I watched my only son disappear down the hallway, his voice sharp and eager as he spoke of lawyers and bankers and a future that no longer seemed to include me. The sound of his laughter drifted back toward me, echoing through the old walls of the house, and for the first time in 40 years, I felt like a stranger within my own home. The rest of that morning unraveled like a nightmare I could not wake from. Tyler paced the living room, his phone glued to his ear. I heard him rattling off addresses, laughing, promising payments that made my head spin. Before long, he announced that movers would be arriving within the hour. They'll pack everything, he said briskly, not even looking at me. My clothes, the TV, anything I want to take. You might as well pack your things too. I blinked, unsure I had heard correctly. My things. Yeah. You're not staying here. This house is mine to sell or keep. Either way, I don't need a roommate anymore. The words landed with the weight of stone. Tyler, this has been our home for 40 years. Your father left, but I kept it. For us. For you. He snorted. And now I'm leaving. Isn't that what everyone does eventually? I gripped the edge of the kitchen table to steady myself. I can't just leave. My pension is only $400 a month. That barely covers groceries, let alone rent. He shrugged as if I'd mentioned the weather. Not my problem, Mom. You've always figured something out before. You'll figure it out again. I wanted to scream, to shake him until the boy I once knew returned to his senses. Instead, my voice came out thin and desperate. $400, Tyler. Where do you expect me to go with that? I don't expect you to go anywhere special, he replied. Just go. His coldness stunned me more than the words themselves. There was no malice in his tone, no fiery rage, just a flat dismissal, as if I were an obligation he had finally outgrown. The movers arrived by noon. 2 men in dark uniforms stepped through the front door, nodding politely at me before setting to work. They carried boxes, lifted furniture, wrapped Tyler's things in thick blankets. The house filled with the sound of tape, tearing, and heavy footsteps drowning out my protests. I lingered in the hallway, clutching the banister, watching strangers dismantle the only life I had left. Tyler barked orders, pointing, commanding, deciding what stayed and what went. Every so often his eyes slid over me with the same detached indifference as one might give to an old chair left at the curb. By mid-afternoon, I noticed movement outside. Curtains fluttered. Blinds shifted. The neighbors were watching. Faces I had known for decades peeked out their eyes, wide and curious, but no one came over. No one opened a door or asked if I was all right. They saw me standing there, with tears streaking down my cheeks, and chose silence. The day stretched into dusk. Tyler, now giddy with anticipation, oversaw the last of his belongings being loaded into the truck. The house felt hollow, its walls echoing with the scrape of furniture and the occasional grunt of the movers. When the truck pulled away, he pulled out a small envelope from his jacket pocket. Here, he said, pressing it into my hand. Inside was a single $50 bill. For the bus or whatever, he added, not meeting my eyes. I stared at the bill, my fingers trembling. $50 after everything. After years of double shifts of skipped meals, so he could eat of sleepless nights, nursing him through childhood fevers. This was what my devotion had been reduced to pocket change. The locksmith arrived just as the sun sank behind the houses across the street. Tyler signed the paperwork quickly, then stood aside as the man replaced the locks on the doors. I heard the metallic click of a new key turning a sound that severed me from the life I had built. When the locksmith left, Tyler pocketed his new set of keys and glanced toward me. You should go now, he said simply. I picked up my small suitcase, the one I used to keep in the closet for overnight visits to relatives long gone, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was sharp with evening chill. Behind me, I heard the door close, followed by the final twist of a lock. In that instant, I knew I no longer had a home. I lingered on the porch with my suitcase in one hand, the $50 bill tucked into my coat pocket. The door had already closed behind me, but something inside urged me to turn back one last time. I told myself it was foolish, that Tyler would be furious if he found me still standing there. Yet I couldn't walk away just yet. The hall closet had always been mine to keep order scarves, gloves, a box of photographs stacked on the shelf. I set down the suitcase, slipped quietly inside, and pulled open the narrow drawer at the bottom. The movers hadn't touched it. Dust lay across the top like a thin blanket. But when I pushed past a pile of old birthday cards and bills, I found something unexpected. It was an envelope yellowed with time, my name written in strong, familiar handwriting. Graziella. My breath caught. The letters tilted just so bold and certain. My hand trembled as I lifted it into the fading light. The flap had been torn open, though the pages inside were still folded neatly. I knew the signature before I even looked. Roberto Delgado. My knees weakened. Roberto, after 20 years of silence here, was proof he had tried to reach me. I sat on the edge of the hallway bench, clutching the letter like a relic. Slowly, I slid the single sheet of paper free. My dearest Graziella, the words began. I beg you to listen before you judge. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I was forced away. Please believe me. I need to explain everything, but not like this. Let me see you. Let me tell you the truth face to face. Tomorrow evening, I will come by your porch at 7. If you don't wish to see me, I will understand, but please know that I never stopped loving you. The ink had faded, but the plea was still alive in every line. He had wanted to explain, had wanted to fight for us, and yet I had never seen this letter until now. My eyes darted to the torn flap, again rage pressing against my ribs. Tyler. He must have found it, hidden it away, and told me nothing. For years I had believed Roberto abandoned me, that he had grown tired and vanished without reason. I had cursed him in my loneliest nights. Now I saw the possibility of another truth, that my son had stolen not only my present, but my past. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope, though the flap would never close again. Memories surged. Tyler glaring at Roberto the first time they met, his sulking silence whenever I spoke of him, the tension that had cracked the air between them. I thought it was jealousy, childish and fleeting. I never imagined it could have hardened into sabotage. How many nights had I stood at the window waiting for Roberto to appear, while Tyler knew the answer sat hidden in a drawer? How many years of bitterness? How many tears had been shaped by that single act of betrayal? I pressed the envelope to my chest, the paper crackling against my heart. If Tyler could steal a letter, what else had he taken? What else had he buried so deep I never even knew it existed? Outside. The wind rattled the bare branches against the siding. I tucked the letter into my suitcase, wedging it between my folded nightgown and an old photo album, and stood. My home no longer belonged to me, but the truth still could. I pulled the door closed softly behind me and stepped into the November evening. The chill struck instantly, biting at my cheeks, filling my lungs with a sharp ache. The street was quiet, lined with houses where lights glowed behind curtained windows. I felt the weight of the letter against my belongings as I lifted the suitcase once more. I walked down the steps and into the dark, carrying not just $50 and a suitcase, but a question that gnawed deeper than hunger or cold. Why had my son wanted to erase Roberto from my life? The letter weighed heavily in my suitcase as I made my way down the quiet street. Porch lights flickered on here and there, but no doors opened. No familiar voices called out to ask where I was going. People had seen me step out of my own home with nothing but a worn bag, yet not a single soul crossed the street to help. I kept walking my shoes, scuffing against the cracked pavement, the cold air pressing harder against my face. By the time I reached the center of town, the shops were closed, their windows dark and lifeless. The diner where I once spent mornings after my night shift years ago was shuttered. Its neon sign, half broken, the O in open, permanently dark. I thought about going inside if it had been open to buy a cup of coffee and stretch $50 as far as I could. But even that comfort was denied me tonight. I drifted past storefronts, clutching my coat tighter around me. My legs ached, and each gust of wind cut deeper through the thin wool. I told myself to keep moving, that if I stopped, I would crumble. Still, after hours of wandering, my body betrayed me. Near the railway station where the tracks stretched into the black horizon, I found a bench beneath a flickering street lamp. I lowered myself slowly, the suitcase by my side, and leaned back against the cold metal slats. The night air settled over me like ice. My hands were stiff, my breath visible. I tried to rest, but memories pressed in. Roberto's letter, Tyler's voice, the door shutting me out of the house I had protected all my life. My chest heaved, though no tears came. They had frozen somewhere inside me. I curled tighter, whispering prayers into the empty dark. Hours dragged by. The station clock struck midnight, then 1. Trains rumbled in the distance, their horns echoing through the town, but none of them stopped. My eyelids grew heavy. Just as I surrendered to the numbness creeping up my fingers, I felt something shift near me. A shadow loomed, and for a moment panic jolted me upright. A man stood a few feet away, ragged and thin, his clothes torn, his beard unkempt. His face was lined by years of hardship. My heart thudded in fear. He raised his hands slightly, as if to show he meant no harm. "Are you all right, ma'am?" His voice was quiet, roughened by the cold. I could not answer. My throat locked. He stepped closer, but not too near, and then to my astonishment, he slipped off his threadbare coat and gently draped it across my shoulders. The fabric smelled of earth and smoke, but the weight of it warmed me more than I expected. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said. I clutched the coat with frozen fingers. "Thank you," I whispered the words, shaking out of me. The man lowered himself onto the far end of the bench, leaving space between us. In the dim glow of the street lamp, I saw his eyes, clearly clear, familiar, impossible. His gaze lingered on me, softened, and then his lips trembled. "You look just like my late wife, Graziella." The world seemed to stop. My name on his tongue, that voice older, rougher, but unmistakable. My breath hitched as I stared at him, the years falling away. The letter in my suitcase burned in my memory. The truth I had just uncovered seemed to collide with the figure beside me. My body went cold and hot all at once as recognition struck. It was Roberto. For a moment I thought my mind was betraying me, conjuring a ghost from the past to torment me in my weakest hour. But as the dim streetlight glinted off his weary eyes, I knew I wasn't imagining him. The lines etched deep into his face, the gray tangled in his beard, the stoop in his shoulders. Time had carved him into someone different. But underneath it all was the man I had once loved. "Roberto," I whispered, my voice breaking around his name. His eyes filled with tears at the sound. He pressed his hands together as though in prayer. "Graziella, after all these years." I shook my head, clutching the coat tighter around me, my body trembling more from the shock than the cold. "I thought you were dead. I thought you had abandoned me without a word. Why didn't you say goodbye?" His shoulders sagged. He looked down at his hands, rough and cracked. "I tried. God knows I tried. But Tyler, he destroyed everything." The words hit me like a slap. I leaned forward, desperate, unwilling to believe, and yet unable to dismiss the conviction in his tone. "What are you saying? Tyler was only a boy when you disappeared." Roberto gave a hollow laugh, bitter and raw. "Old enough to hate me. Old enough to make sure you hated me too." My breath caught, and I thought of the letter tucked inside my suitcase, the unopened plea hidden away all these years. "You wrote to me," I said, my voice barely audible. His head snapped up. "Yes. I left a letter on your porch." I begged for a chance to explain. "I waited outside that night praying you'd come. You never did. I thought you'd made your choice." I pressed a trembling hand to my lips. "I never saw it. I never knew." Silence hung between us, broken only by the rattle of a passing train. The cold air burned my lungs, but all I felt was the heat of betrayal rising inside me. Roberto's voice grew heavier, as though dragged by the weight of 2 lost decades. The night Tyler found me in your kitchen, I thought he was just angry, protective. But afterward, he came to me. He said if I didn't leave, he'd ruin me. I laughed at him. He was only 25. But the next week, I lost my job. Rumors spread that I was stealing from the company. No one would hire me. Everywhere I turned, doors slammed shut. I didn't have the money, the power, or the strength to fight him. I felt as though the ground beneath the bench had disappeared. He was capable of that. At 25, he was clever. Viciously clever, Roberto said. I thought you were in on it. He told me you wanted nothing more to do with me, that you'd said it yourself. I left because I couldn't bear to see you turn me away. Tears blurred my vision, the wind stinging my cheeks. I never said those words. I never would have. Roberto, I waited for you. I hated you for leaving me, but I still waited. His hands reached toward mine, hesitated, then rested gently over them. Even roughened by years of hardship, his touch carried the warmth I remembered. Then it was all lies. Lies to keep us apart. I thought of Tyler's smug face, of the way he had shoved me out of my own house with $50 of the cruel words he had thrown at me that morning. Now, like pieces of a cruel puzzle, the truth began to fit together. My son hadn't just betrayed me today. He had been betraying me for decades. Roberto's words hung between us, sharp and undeniable. My pulse thudded in my ears, every breath shallow. For years I had cursed him for vanishing, and now hearing his story, the blame twisted in an entirely new direction. I don't understand. I managed, clutching his coat closer around my shoulders. How could Tyler, my own son, have ruined you like that? Roberto rubbed his hands together, staring at the pavement, as if it held the answers. It started the night he found me in your kitchen. I remember his face so full of rage, like I had committed a crime. He cornered me outside afterward. Told me if I didn't leave you, he'd make sure I never worked again. I thought it was empty talk. But 2 days later, my supervisor called me into the office. He looked up, eyes glassy. They said money had gone missing from the factory till a few $100s. Nothing I had ever touched. But someone had accused me, and the rumor spread fast. I was suspended without pay. When I protested, the manager leaned across his desk and said he'd gotten a call from someone who knew I was using a widow for her money. His words, not mine. I knew then Tyler had made good on his threat. I pressed a hand to my chest, my heart aching. But he was just a boy. How could he? My voice trailed off as the truth settled. Tyler had always known how to manipulate. Even as a teenager, he had twisted small things to his advantage, feigning illness, to skip school, borrowing money from neighbors, and swearing I had promised to repay them. I had dismissed it as immaturity. I never saw the cruelty growing beneath it. Roberto's voice was low, almost ashamed. I tried to fight back. I went to other factories, construction sites, anywhere that would take me. But somehow, every place I applied already knew my name. They looked at me like I was poison. After weeks of rejection, I sold what little I had left just to stay afloat. Then the landlord came knocking. He said someone again, I can only assume Tyler, told him I was dangerous, that I had a record. He evicted me without a second thought. I covered my mouth, my stomach twisting. All this time I thought you left because I wasn't enough. Roberto reached for my hand, holding it gently, despite the calluses. No, Graziella. I left because I thought you had turned against me. Your son told me you wanted nothing more to do with me, that you said I was a mistake. I believed him, because the evidence piled up everywhere I turned. The letter in my suitcase pulsed in my mind like a hidden heartbeat. He had tried to reach me. Tyler must have intercepted it, torn it open, stolen my chance to hear the truth. I swallowed hard. So you lost everything because of him. Your job, your home, your reputation. All because he couldn't stand to share me. Roberto's eyes shone with sorrow. Yes, he knew your love was my anchor, and he cut me loose from it. Once I was adrift, I had nothing left. Tears pricked my eyes hot and relentless. I had raised Tyler alone, defended him, sacrificed my body and soul to give him stability after his father walked away. And now I saw the cruel irony he had taken, that love, and weaponized it against me, turning it into a leash that bound us both. I shook my head slowly, the reality pressing down until I thought I would suffocate. If he lied about this, if he could destroy you so easily, then what else has he hidden from me? Roberto's grip on my hand tightened, steadying me against the storm building inside. His silence was answer enough. The cold wind whipped through the station as I clutched his hand, the truth clawing at my chest. If Tyler had once robbed me of love, what else had he stolen, without me even knowing? The night air grew colder, gnawing at my bones, even through Roberto's worn coat. He studied my face with concern and finally said, "You can't stay out here. Come with me. There's a place where you'll be safe tonight." I hesitated. Pride kept my mouth closed, but exhaustion betrayed me. My legs trembled as I stood, and without a word, I followed him. We walked through narrow streets until the town grew quiet. At the corner of Maple and Third stood an old brick church, its steeple cutting into the moonlit sky. Beside it, a smaller building glowed warmly through frosted windows. Roberto led me to the door. Inside, the scent of bread and faint incense greeted us. Cots lined the walls, and a few weary souls slept beneath blankets. At the front desk sat a woman in a plain navy habit, her silver hair tucked neatly beneath her veil. She looked up as we entered. "Roberto?" she said softly, surprise flickering in her eyes. "It's been years." He nodded, suddenly, sheepish. "Sister Magdalena, this is Graciela." Her gaze shifted to me, and for a long moment, she studied my face with such intensity I thought she might see straight through me. Then quietly, she murmured, "So he finally found you." I blinked. "Found me." She folded her hands on the desk. "Years ago, Roberto came here asking about you. He said he needed to speak to you urgently. I remember the desperation in his voice. But before he could reach you, your son arrived." My stomach knotted. "Tyler." "Yes." She nodded, gravely. "He told Roberto to leave. Said you wanted nothing more to do with him. He warned Roberto that if he didn't go, the police would be called. I remember because I asked Roberto if he was sure about leaving. He just shook his head and said he wouldn't risk hurting you further." The words sank deep, heavy as stone. Roberto had come back. He had stood within reach, looking for me. And Tyler had stood between us like a wall. I steadied myself on the desk. "So he tried again." Magdalena's eyes softened. "More than once. I recall another time, maybe 5 years later. He came with a small bundle of flowers asking if you still lived in the neighborhood. That night, Tyler appeared again, just as angry, just as determined. I asked Roberto afterward why he didn't force the matter, why he let Tyler speak for you. He said he thought protecting your peace was worth his own pain." Roberto lowered his head, shame pulling at his shoulders. "I thought I was doing right by you. I believed Tyler when he said you wanted no part of me. Each time I tried, he found me first. And each time I let him drive me away." I felt a sob rising in my chest, though I held it back. The betrayal stretched further than I'd ever imagined. Not just a hidden letter, not just false rumors, but years stolen from me. Moments that might have been filled with companionship, with laughter, with love. Sister Magdalena rose and touched my arm gently. "You've carried a heavy burden alone, Graciela. Tonight you can rest. There is a bed and a warm meal waiting." I nodded, unable to speak. My throat was too tight, my heart too heavy. Roberto led me down a narrow hallway, where clean sheets waited. The shelter was simple, but it felt like mercy. As I lay down, the truth pressed against me like the cold outside. Roberto had not abandoned me. My son had. The shelter's hall was quiet, the hum of the furnace and the soft shuffle of footsteps in the distance the only sounds. I sat on the edge of the narrow cot, my hands folded in my lap. Across from me, Roberto lowered himself onto a chair, his posture weary but his eyes steady. "You deserve to know what happened after I left," he said, his voice low, almost apologetic. I braced myself. Part of me wanted to turn away to stop the flood of memories before it could drown me again. But another part, a deeper, braver part, needed to hear every word. He began slowly, as though peeling away layers of a wound. When I realized I couldn't fight Tyler, I left town. I thought distance would dull the ache. I was wrong. Every mile I traveled away from you only deepened the emptiness. I wandered from job to job, never staying long enough for rumors to follow me. Then one night in Columbus, I met Patricia. The name startled me, though I kept my face composed. She was kind, Roberto continued. Widowed young with 2 children to raise. She worked at a grocery store, exhausted but proud. When I lost another job, she offered me her couch until I got back on my feet. I never did. One day she asked if I'd stay. She didn't want romance, not really. She wanted stability. And I needed a roof over my head. We agreed to share what little we had. His eyes flickered with shame. It wasn't love, Graciela. I never gave her what I gave you, but I respected her. She was decent, and I tried to be decent in return. I listened, my hands tightening on the blanket. A part of me ached with jealousy, another with guilt. He had built a life, however fragile, while I sat alone, nursing bitterness. Then came the sickness. Roberto said, his voice breaking. Patricia was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. By then her children were grown and gone, living lives of their own. She depended on me. I couldn't leave her, not when she was slipping away. I sold the car, then the furniture. I emptied what little savings we had. Every penny went to hospital bills, treatments, medications. But none of it stopped the disease. His hands rubbed together nervously, rough skin against rough skin. 2 years, Graciela. 2 years of watching her fade. And then one quiet morning, she was gone. Just like that. He fell silent, the weight of grief pressing between us. I reached out, laying my hand over his. He closed his eyes briefly, as though the touch steadied him. When she died, he continued. Her children returned. They thanked me politely, then told me I was on my own. The apartment was in Patricia's name, and they wanted it sold. They gave me a few dollars for bus fare, and that was that. I had nowhere to go. My throat tightened. So you ended up on the street. He nodded. Mostly shelters. Sometimes benches like tonight. I've worked odd jobs when I could, but without references it's hard. Still, through all of it, not a day went by that I didn't think of you. Even when I was married, even when Patricia was dying, you were there in the back of my mind, the ache I carried everywhere. His confession cracked something open inside me. For 20 years I had painted him as the villain of my loneliness. Yet here he was, a man who had been broken not by indifference, but by circumstance, and still he had carried me in his heart. Tears blurred my vision. I turned my hand beneath his, so our fingers interlaced. The warmth was faint, but it was real. He looked at me, then his eyes heavy with regret, but also with something else, something I remembered. I thought of you every day, he whispered, and for the first time in decades I felt the fragile stirrings of the love I thought had been buried with the past. The next morning, light filtered weakly through the narrow shelter windows. I woke stiff from the thin mattress, but more rested than I'd expected. Roberto sat across from me at a small wooden table, sipping from a chipped mug of coffee. His eyes carried the weight of too many sleepless nights, but when he looked at me, they softened. Before I could speak, my phone buzzed inside my coat pocket. The sound startled me. I had nearly forgotten it was still with me. When I pulled it out, Tyler's name glared across the screen. My stomach clenched. I pressed the answer button slowly. "Hello, Mom." Tyler's voice rang with a cheerfulness so forced it felt rehearsed. "I've been wondering where you are. The neighbors keep asking. They saw you leave with a suitcase last night. I told them you were fine, of course, but you are fine, aren't you?" I closed my eyes briefly, steadying my breath. "I'm managing." There was a pause, then a chuckle. "Managing. You make it sound dramatic. Look, you know this is for the best. I need space, and you need to figure out your own situation. Don't worry, I'll help you if it becomes too hard. People are already asking questions about me, about us, and I can't have anyone thinking I threw my mother out." There it was. The truth tucked between his words. His concern wasn't for me, but for how he looked to others. Across the table, Roberto's jaw tightened. He leaned forward slightly, straining to hear the voice he clearly recognized. His hands curled into fists, but he stayed silent. Tyler went on. "So tell me where you ended up. Did you go to Aunt Isabel's? Or maybe you found a motel for the night?" I hesitated. The name Isabel stung. My sister had been gone nearly 10 years, and he knew it. But he wasn't asking out of forgetfulness. He was probing, fishing for details, seeking control, even from afar. "I'm somewhere safe," I said firmly. Another pause. His tone sharpened. "Safe," with who I glanced at Roberto. His eyes met mine steady, though his mouth was set in a grim line. He gave the faintest shake of his head, urging me not to say more. Tyler's voice dropped lower. "Mom, I deserve to know. After everything I've done for you, you owe me at least that. I don't want you getting taken advantage of by some stranger." The irony of those words nearly made me laugh. After everything I'd heard from Roberto, it was clear Tyler had been the one exploiting me for decades. But still, I couldn't bring myself to reveal the truth, not yet. The thought of what Tyler might do if he knew Roberto was with me tightened every muscle in my body. "I'll be fine," I repeated, my voice steady. "You don't need to worry." He sighed theatrically. "Fine, but don't make me regret trusting you. People are watching now, and I won't have them thinking I'm a bad son." "I'll call again later." The line went dead before I could respond. For a long moment I sat frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. When I finally lowered it, I found Roberto staring at me. "He hasn't changed," Roberto said quietly, still twisting every word, still making it about him. I set the phone down on the table, the weight of it heavier than ever. Tyler was watching me from a distance, pretending to care while guarding his image. He had no idea who sat across from me now, or how the truth of the past had begun to unravel in his absence. The following afternoon, I sat with Roberto in the shelter's small garden, folding donated laundry with slow, deliberate motions. The winter air was sharp, but sunlight cut through the bare branches, warming my shoulders. For the first time in days, I felt a fragile calm. Then came the sound of tires screeching against the curb. Heads turned. A gleaming red sports car pulled up in front of the church, its polished surface catching the sun like a flare. My stomach clenched. Tyler stepped out, sunglasses perched on his face, his suit pressed to perfection. He looked every inch the millionaire he now was. He didn't glance at the other residents gathered near the entrance. His eyes locked on me as he strode forward, his smile fixed but brittle. "Mom, we need to talk." I set the basket of laundry down, my hands trembling slightly. "Tyler, this isn't the place." "It's exactly the place," he interrupted, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. He thrust it into my hands. $5,000. Cash. Take it. Rent a small apartment somewhere. Live quietly. And forget this tramp. He flicked his chin toward Roberto, who had risen to his feet beside me. The word struck me like ice. I looked at the envelope, then at my son's face, so calm in its cruelty. "Tyler, Do you hear yourself? I hear myself perfectly. His tone was smooth, practiced. This man is a parasite. He's been living off scraps for years, and now he sees you as his golden ticket. I won't allow it. Roberto's shoulders straightened, his jaw tight. I don't want your money, Tyler. And I'm not here to take hers. Tyler's smile turned venomous. You expect me to believe that you've been circling like a vulture for 20 years. I should have known you'd crawl back the moment she was vulnerable. Roberto took a step forward, his voice calm but firm. The only thing I've wanted all these years is a chance to tell her the truth. A truth you've hidden. Tyler's composure faltered for the briefest moment before he recovered, laughing harshly. Truth? The truth is, I've supported her for decades. Where were you when she worked herself half to death? Where were you when bills piled up and food ran thin? I was there. Not you. I felt heat rise in my chest. You weren't supporting me, Tyler. I was supporting you. My voice carried louder than I intended, echoing against the shelter walls. Several residents had paused their tasks, listening now. His face darkened. He lowered his voice, but the anger simmered. Take the money, Mom. Don't embarrass me like this. I handed the envelope back. My fingers no longer trembled. I don't want your money. Gasps and murmurs spread among the onlookers. Sister Magdalena stepped quietly into the garden, her eyes fixed on the scene. Tyler noticed and forced another smile, but his voice cracked around the edges. Be reasonable, he said, the charm straining. This place isn't fit for you. Look around. These people, they're not your kind. You belong somewhere better. I can make that happen. I shook my head. These people have shown me more kindness in 2 days than you have in years. The words seemed to strike him harder than any slap. His jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening as he shoved the envelope back into his pocket. He looked around suddenly, aware of the eyes on him, the whispers gathering like storm clouds. You don't know what you're doing, he hissed, leaning close. But if you choose him over me, don't expect me to save you when it all comes crashing down. He turned sharply, striding back toward his car. The engine roared to life, a beast awakened, and the tires screeched as he sped away from the shelter. The murmurs swelled behind me, voices rising, not with judgment, but with support. People had seen, people had heard. For the first time, it wasn't just my word against his. 2 days after Tyler's dramatic visit, the shelter buzzed with whispers. Some said he would return with more money. Others thought he might finally leave me alone. I knew my son well enough to expect neither. Tyler never conceded defeat. Late in the afternoon, I stepped into the common room to find him already there. His sports car gleamed outside like a crimson warning. He stood in the center of the room, a thick folder clutched in his hand, his suit immaculate, his expression smug. Mother, he said smoothly, his voice carrying across the crowded space. I've brought proof. Proof of exactly who you're dealing with. He turned toward Roberto, who sat quietly in a chair near the window. This man you think you can trust? He's a fraud. A criminal. The room fell silent. Shelter residents froze, their eyes darting between us. Sister Magdalena stepped forward cautiously, but Tyler opened the folder before she could speak. He pulled out a handful of papers, waving them in the air. Here it is, he declared. Arrest records, charges of theft, assault, even fraud. This is the man you've chosen over your own son. My breath caught. Roberto remained still, his jaw tight, but his eyes unflinching. Those aren't real, he said calmly. Tyler barked a laugh. Of course you'd say that. You've been lying for decades. But now the truth is on paper. Sister Magdalena frowned. Let me see those documents. Tyler hesitated, but handed her a few sheets with a flourish. She scanned them, her brows knitting together. These don't look official, she murmured. There are no seals, no signatures. Just then, the door opened. and a tall man in a brown coat stepped inside. His presence was steady, commanding without needing to raise his voice. Detective Carl Whitaker. He introduced himself, holding up his badge. We received a call about a disturbance. Sister Magdalena let out a quiet breath of relief. Detective, thank you for coming. Perhaps you can make sense of this. She handed him the papers. Tyler's smile faltered, but quickly returned. Perfect timing, Detective. Now you'll see exactly what kind of man is trying to manipulate my mother. Whitaker adjusted his glasses and examined the documents carefully. The room was silent, but for the shuffle of papers as he turned each page. Finally, he looked up, his expression unreadable. Mr. Moreno, he said evenly, these documents are forgeries. The color drained from Tyler's face. What? That's impossible. Whitaker tapped a page with his finger. This so-called arrest record lists a case number that doesn't exist. The formatting is inconsistent with state records. And here, an address that wasn't even built until 10 years after the supposed charge. Whoever made these didn't do their homework. A murmur rippled through the residence. Roberto lifted his head, his eyes locking on Tyler's. For the first time, I saw strength in his posture, vindication in the set of his shoulders. Whitaker folded the papers and handed them back. If I were you, I'd stop spreading false information. Falsifying legal records is a serious offense. Do you understand? Tyler's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. His confidence had slipped. His charm cracked wide. He glanced around the room, seeing not admiration, but suspicion in every face. I stepped forward, my voice steady. You've gone too far, Tyler. You tried to ruin him once and you've tried again. But the truth always rises. For a moment, something like panic flickered in his eyes. He stuffed the papers back into the folder, his hands shaking despite his effort to appear composed. Whitaker looked between us. I'll be keeping an eye on things here. If there are more disturbances, we'll take it further. With that, he tipped his hat slightly and left. The room stayed hushed, the tension thick. Tyler stood alone in the center, stripped of his pretense, the weight of his lies pressing down. Without another word, he stormed out the door, slamming hard behind him. I turned to Roberto, who met my gaze with quiet resolve. Tyler's web of lies was unraveling at last, but I knew my son well enough to understand he wouldn't stop here. He never stopped until there was nothing left to fight for. It was late evening when the squad car pulled into the shelter's gravel lot. The blue and red lights cut through the darkness, painting the brick walls in restless color. My stomach tightened. I knew who had summoned them before the officers even stepped out. 2 uniformed men approached the door, one of them carrying a notepad. Behind them, a familiar figure emerged from his shiny car, straightening his tie with deliberate confidence. Tyler. His smugness was back, though I could see the cracks beneath it. Officers, he began, before they'd even crossed the threshold, thank you for coming. My mother is being manipulated by this man. He jabbed a finger toward Roberto, who stood beside me in the foyer. Calm, but unyielding. He's exploiting her vulnerability. She doesn't know what she's doing. The officers looked at me first, then at Roberto. Ma'am, is that true? The older one asked, his tone measured. I straightened my spine and felt a surge of resolve I hadn't known in years. No. What is true is that my son won the lottery, threw me out of my home, and left me with $50. He abandoned me. This man I gestured toward Roberto has only shown me kindness. Tyler's mouth opened, but I didn't let him interrupt. I am 70 years old. I may be tired, but I am not confused. I know who I am, and I know who I trust. No one is forcing me to be here. The younger officer's brows lifted slightly, as though impressed by the firmness in my voice. Sister Magdalena stepped forward from the common room, her hands clasped before her. Officers, I am the director of this shelter. Graciela has been with us several days. She has managed her own affairs, made her own choices, and carried herself with clarity and independence. There is no sign whatsoever of exploitation. One of the residents nodded from a nearby chair. "She's sharper than most of us here," he added under his breath, drawing a ripple of chuckles. Tyler's face flushed red. He turned to Roberto with venom. "You see what you've done? You've poisoned her against her own son." Roberto finally spoke, his voice even steady. "I haven't poisoned anything, Tyler. I've told her the truth. The rest is hers to decide." The older officer tapped his pen against his notepad. "I know your name," he said slowly to Roberto. "Detective Whitaker already looked into these accusations, didn't he?" "Yes," Roberto replied simply. The officer turned to Tyler. "Then what we have here is a grown woman, competent and lucid, making her own choices. That's the end of it." Tyler's jaw tightened. "You don't understand. She's my mother. She belongs with me." The officer closed his notepad. His voice was firm now. "She belongs to herself." The words landed like a gavel striking wood. Tyler's composure faltered, his eyes darting between me, Roberto, and the witnesses gathering in the doorway. Every person saw him not as a protective son, but as a desperate man grasping for control. The officers gave a polite nod to Sister Magdalena, then turned toward the door. "Call us if there are any real disturbances," the older one said. "But from what I see, there's nothing unlawful happening here." When they left, silence lingered in the foyer. Tyler stared at me, his expression caught between fury and disbelief. He had appealed to the law, and even they had rejected him. I felt Roberto's hand brush against mine, a quiet anchor. Around us, residents murmured the truth, now visible to all. Tyler turned abruptly, storming out into the night. But I knew this wasn't the end. If authority had stripped him of control, he would find another way to strike back. The foyer still echoed with the officer's departure when Tyler spun back toward me. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with a fevered light. The mask he had worn for so long, the charm, the composure, the polished smile was gone. What stood before me was raw, unfiltered rage. "You think you've won because the police won't listen." His voice trembled too loud in the quiet shelter. "You think you can stand there with him, with all of them, and humiliate me." "Tyler," I said, my voice unsteady but firm, "no one is humiliating you. This is the truth, and you can't twist it anymore." He laughed, harsh and broken, then stepped closer until his shadow loomed over me. "The truth, I'll tell you the truth, Mother. You're mine, always mine. I won't share you with anyone." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Residents pressed back, some whispering, others staring wide-eyed. Sister Magdalena's hand flew to her mouth. Even Roberto, who had held steady through every one of Tyler's schemes, stiffened as if struck. I could only stare. My heart pounded. My knees threatened to buckle. "Tyler, what are you saying?" He lifted his hands, clutching at the air as if grasping for something invisible. "After Dad left, it was just us. Me and you. You told me we'd be okay if we stuck together. And we were. I was the man of the house. You didn't need anyone else." His voice cracked. I made sure of it. The letter in my suitcase, the lies that had severed Roberto from me, every cruel word in the days since it all clicked into place. This wasn't just greed or pride. It was possession, a twisted devotion that had rotted into obsession. "You ruined everything," he spat, turning toward Roberto. "She was fine until you. She had me. She didn't need you. She doesn't need anyone." Roberto didn't flinch. His voice was steady, though sorrow laced every word. "She's not an object to be owned, Tyler. She's your mother. She deserves freedom, respect, love. Love." Tyler barked out a laugh. "I gave her love. I gave her everything." His voice rose into a shout, echoing off the shelter walls. "And now she throws it away for a tramp with nothing to his name." I trembled, but something stronger than fear steadied me. For decades I had swallowed his temper, soothed his wounds, believed his words. But tonight, Under the weight of his confession, the illusion shattered. "You didn't give me love, Tyler," I said, my voice trembling at first, then hardening. "You gave me chains. You took my sacrifices and turned them into debts. You twisted my devotion into your weapon. That's not love. That's control." The silence that followed was suffocating. Tyler's chest heaved. His fists clenched at his sides. Around us, the residents watched, their faces etched with a mixture of pity and horror. Sister Magdalena stepped closer, her voice quiet but firm. "You've spoken what was hidden, Tyler, and now everyone sees." For a heartbeat, his eyes darted wildly, searching the crowd, looking for one sympathetic face. There were none. I felt Roberto's hand touch mine, steady grounding. I didn't pull away. For the first time in my life, I saw my son clearly, not as the boy I had raised, not as the man I had defended, but as the stranger his obsession had made him. And in that moment, I knew to save what remained of my soul, I would have to sever the tie that bound me to his darkness. The silence in the shelter stretched long after Tyler's outburst. My hands shook, but my voice came out steady, carried on the strength I hadn't felt in years. "You lost me the day you locked that door," I said, my eyes fixed on his. "Not tonight, not last week back then. When you shut me out of my own home, you ended the bond we had." His face crumpled, anger and panic colliding. "No, Mom. Don't say that." I was angry, confused. "I didn't mean it. We can fix this." His voice softened, then rose in desperation. "I'll buy you a house bigger than you've ever dreamed of. A mansion with a garden with staff to take care of you. Just come with me." I shook my head. "You think bricks and chandeliers can replace respect? Can erase the lies, the years you stole from me?" His expression hardened again, turning cruel. "If you walk away from me now, you'll regret it. Everyone will know you chose a beggar over your own son." "I'll make sure of it." I stepped closer so he could see there was no fear left in me. "I'm not part of your family anymore. Family doesn't chain love to control. Family doesn't lie and destroy. Whatever you are to me now, it isn't a son." The words hung heavy, final. Around us, the air thickened, the weight of truth undeniable. Tyler's eyes darted from my face to Roberto's, then to the silent crowd that bore witness. He seemed smaller, suddenly stripped of his grandeur, standing alone in his expensive suit, with no one to defend him. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice cracking with humiliation. "Don't come crawling back when it all falls apart." With that, he spun on his heel, storming out into the night. The door slammed so hard the frame rattled, but the echo of his departure felt less like a wound and more like release. I exhaled the breath, shuddering out of me as though I'd been holding it for years. My hands trembled, but Roberto's touch steadied me. Around us, the residents and Sister Magdalena stood quietly, not with judgment, but with a kind of reverence. They had seen me sever the chain. For the first time in decades, I felt the weight lifting, heavy links of fear and guilt clattering away behind me. What lay ahead was uncertain, fragile, but it was mine. And in that moment, I vowed to rebuild a life from the ruins Tyler had left, piece by piece, brick by brick. The days after Tyler's departure felt like stepping into a world scrubbed clean of his shadow. I still carried bruises in my heart, but for the first time in decades, I felt free to choose where I would walk next. Sister Magdalena called me into her office one morning. The air smelled of polished wood and old incense. She folded her hands across the desk, her kind eyes steady. "There's a couple I know," she said, "owners of a small bakery in town. They have a flat above the shop, humble but warm. I think it would suit you and Roberto." When we saw it later that afternoon, I nearly wept. The walls were plain, the furniture mismatched, but the air smelled of yeast and sugar, and sunlight streamed through the windows. After nights on benches and cots, it felt like a palace. Roberto clasped my hand, and we both said yes without hesitation. We began to build something new, fragile but real. I found work caring for an elderly woman named Mrs. Ellison. She was sharp-tongued but softened when I sang her old hymns as I brushed her hair. The small pay was steady, and it gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Roberto, with his rough hands and quiet patience, found a job at a local garage. Engines, he said, reminded him of people they sputtered and broke down, but with care and persistence, they could be coaxed back to life. Watching him return each evening with grease under his nails and a tired but proud smile stirred a tenderness in me I thought I had buried forever. Life shrank to simplicity, but it expanded in ways that mattered. We shared bread still warm from the bakery below, laughed over burnt soup, argued gently about who would sweep the floor. In those small rituals, I rediscovered what it meant to live, not just to survive. Then came the whispers. At first I ignored them, but soon enough, neighbors and customers began to share pieces of gossip, too loud to be dismissed. Tyler's mansion in the city, the endless parties the cars lined like trophies, each indulgence chipped away at his fortune. What had seemed endless was already dwindling. Creditors circled. His name appeared in hushed tones at the bank. One evening, as Roberto and I shared coffee at our small kitchen table, I listened to the laughter from the bakery downstairs and thought of my son alone in his gilded house, chasing pleasures that dissolved as quickly as they came. The truth settled over me gently, not with triumph, but with clarity. Wealth had given Tyler nothing but hunger. My own life, stripped bare and rebuilt from ashes, was richer than his would ever be. I reached for Roberto's hand, feeling the calluses, the warmth, the pulse of a man who had chosen to stay even when the world turned cruel. In his steady presence in the simple rhythms of honest work, I found a peace no lottery could buy. And in that peace, I planted the first seeds of renewal. 3 months passed like a slow turning of seasons. Winter softened the air, grew gentler, and with it my heart found a rhythm I hadn't known in decades. Roberto and I no longer walked as shadows of our former selves. We walked as two people rediscovering what it meant to live. When he asked me to marry him, there was no diamond, no velvet box, just his calloused hand covering mine at the kitchen table, his voice steady and quiet. "Graciela," he said, "we've lost enough years. Let's not lose another." My answer came before the words could even form. Yes. The chapel of the shelter became our cathedral. Its wooden pews were polished by countless hands, its windows simple but bright with morning sun. Sister Magdalena herself stood ready, her smile warm, her eyes shining with quiet pride. The guests were not dressed in finery, but their presence filled the room with more richness than any gown or jewel. The residents of the shelter who had once seen me arrived trembling and lost, now clapped me on the shoulder, whispered blessings, and pressed my hands with affection. Neighbors from the bakery below came too, carrying baskets of fresh bread as their gift. For the first time in years, they looked at me not with pity or suspicion, but with respect. I wore a modest dress borrowed from Mrs. Ellison's granddaughter, hemmed to fit its fabric plain but dignified. Roberto wore a second-hand suit, pressed as best as Sister Magdalena's iron could manage. And yet, when we stood before each other, I felt as though we were draped in something grander than silk or gold. The vows were simple, but in each word I heard the weight of 2 decades lost and the promise of whatever time we had left. In sickness and in health, I said, my voice catching, thinking of Patricia's final days and the sacrifices Roberto had made. For richer or poorer, he answered, glancing at my worn hands, knowing full well what poverty had already cost us both. When we exchanged rings, they were not crafted from platinum or set with jewels. They were thin bands of silver polished by a local jeweler who refused payment when he learned our story. Love doesn't need diamonds, he had told us, pressing the rings into Roberto's palm. And standing there in that chapel, I knew he was right. The kiss was tender, not the fiery passion of youth, but the deep, steady warmth of two souls who had found their way back to each other. Applause filled the small room, cheers rising louder than the chapel had likely heard in years. As we stepped out into the sunlight, hand in hand, I felt something shift inside me. Not the giddiness of a new bride, but the calm assurance of a woman who had walked through fire and come out whole. I had been betrayed, abandoned, and stripped of everything I thought defined me. But standing there with Roberto, I understood that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt not in grand gestures, but in the quiet constancy of love renewed. And with that truth, our story turned toward its final chapter. The weeks after our wedding settled into a rhythm so gentle it felt almost sacred. Each morning, I woke to the aroma of bread drifting up from the bakery below and the steady sound of Roberto moving about the kitchen. Life was humble, modest furniture, second-hand curtains, chipped dishes, but it was ours. For the first time in decades, the walls around me held peace instead of tension. One evening, while sorting through the last of the boxes I had carried from the shelter, I found an old brass key resting at the bottom of my suitcase. It was tarnished edges, worn smooth by years of turning locks that no longer existed. It had once belonged to the house. Tyler had forced me to leave the house where my love had been shackled to obligation. I held it in my palm for a long while, the weight of it pressing memories against my skin. That house was gone to me not by bricks or deed, but by what had happened within its walls. Yet the key felt like something more than a relic. It felt like a question. Who would I allow through the doors of my life? Now Roberto entered quietly, his hands stained with grease from the garage, and looked at me with gentle curiosity. "What's that?" "A reminder," I whispered. That night, after he had gone to bed, I pulled open the drawer of my small writing desk. I placed the brass key inside and shut it firmly. The click sounded like closure, like a promise. Not for intrusion, I whispered into the stillness, only for respect. The words lingered in the air, soft yet unbreakable. The next morning, I rose before dawn and sat at the window. The Atlantic stretched out before me, gray waves rolling under the first blush of sunrise. Light spilled across the water, reaching toward me like a benediction. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, holding a cup of coffee between my hands, and let the warmth seep into me. For 70 years I had lived defined by others, by my husband, who abandoned me, by the son who bound me with guilt, by neighbors who turned away when I stumbled. But in that quiet hour, I felt something new, freedom. Freedom not as escape, but as choice. Freedom to open or close my door to welcome, or to refuse to guard or to give. Behind me, I heard Roberto stir his footsteps. Familiar now, a comfort I hadn't known I still deserved. When he appeared at the doorway, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, I smiled, not because I needed him, but because I wanted him there. That was the difference. That was everything. The brass key remained locked in my desk, a symbol of boundaries reclaimed. The door to my home, my heart, and my life would never again swing open to entitlement or demand. It would open only when respect first knocked. I turned back to the sunrise, its glow gilding the waves and the small apartment we called ours. For the first time in decades, the future didn't frighten me. It was mine, to choose mine, to guard mine, to share. And perhaps the truest riches were never counted in millions, but in the simple power of deciding who may enter and who must remain outside. When respect finally knocks, will you open the door or guard it forever?